Great. Well, I think we'll start going here, where I think we're going to have a good probably 40 or 45 minutes of content, I'm hoping, and then some time at the end for questions. So we'll get rolling here so we have a little bit of time. My name is Brandon Bellanti. I am a second-year student at SLIS in COCIS, and I work at the COCIS Tech Lab as a TRA, or I did before the quarantine started. But I wanted to do this workshop because I started using Tableau about a year ago, pretty heavily about 6 months ago, and really found it to be a useful tool. And it makes creating visualizations really easy. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of the process. The outline for today's workshop is going to be, I'm going to give kind of just a brief overview of what I mean when we're talking about data visualization, and then get into actually working with Tableau. That'll be the brunt of the workshop. So I'm going to talk about loading data into Tableau, cleaning and organizing your data within Tableau, and then creating individual sheets and ultimately a dashboard. And those are just the terms that Tableau uses. The sheet would be one specific graph or chart or any kind of visualization. And then the dashboard is kind of this collection of sheets that work together to tell a story. There's another part of Tableau that gets a little bit more in depth, but if you can work with sheets and dashboards, you're good to go. And then at the end, what I want to do is have time for questions if people have specific questions, or if we're going through and you're like, hey, I wonder what this chart would look like with this data that we're working with. We may be able to crank out a couple last minute visualizations based on something that you might find interesting in the data. So there's where we'll spend some time today. So first, what is data visualization? So this definition, I've found a lot of places, couldn't really find a source. I think it's pretty generic, but it's just the graphic representation of data. So we're just talking about any kind of chart or diagrams, anything that helps to display data in a graphical form. So it could be as simple as a bar chart in Excel, or it could be as complex as something like a fully interactive graphic embedded on a website. I know New York Times and Washington Post have had some really cool stories lately where as you're scrolling down, there's a lot of things happening and pieces moving around. And I wanted to kind of preface this whole presentation by saying kind of the why behind why I think this is a really important topic for us as librarians and information professionals, that data visualizations can help make information understandable and accessible to a wider audience. So if you think of, reading results in a journal article or something where you have, a lot of percentages or different numbers, visualizations make those into kind of this a little bit more accessible format where you can see and understand what is happening in the data a little bit better. So that is, I think, why this topic is really important for us as librarians. There's a lot of context. I chose a library data set to show, hopefully something like you may deal with in your libraries. This is data straight out of an ILS. So you may be working with data very similar to this, and your managers or higher ups in the library, the stakeholders, say, hey, can you tell us, what's the breakdown of our age? And you can say, yeah, I can make a graphic that looks like this and shows you kind of the distribution of our age groups using the library. So that's why I chose the data we're going to work with today. But so continuing on, oops, skipped over a couple slides here, I think. There we go. So some of the goals of data visualization, there's really 3 different things you can do. They allow us to explore different data. So say you just have a data set and you crank out a few different visualizations to help you understand the data that's there and to see kind of these big trends. And then as you start to understand the data set more, you start to ask questions about the data. Like, I wonder, for instance, are, say, patrons in a certain age group checking out more books than patrons in another age group? So there's a question that you can ask. And then go to the data and look for that analysis. And then finally, once you've done your analysis, visualizations allow you to present that analysis to library stakeholders, whether that's trustees of the library or town meetings, anything where you're presenting data about libraries or whatever data you're working with. This visualization on the right, I just threw it in there because it's kind of a cool one, I think. It shows different countries, so represented by the colors you can see are the different continents, and then it's increase in life expectancy over a certain amount of years. So the size of the circles represent different things, the colors associate them with different continents. There's a lot happening in this visualization. We're not going to get into it, but this is just an example of something I think is kind of cool that you can see as the years go on, life expectancy is going up. The numbers over here, I believe, represent minutes or hours. I looked it up earlier and I don't remember off the top of my head, but you can kind of see the visual of that. So before we start, I think a couple of important questions to ask. Get to know your data, so know what kinds of data you have. I'll show you a little bit with the data set we're going to be working with, just what I mean by this. So this is a step where it's important to recognize what data you do have. And then you can also figure out, based on the next couple of questions here, maybe if you're missing data, and you can say, okay, well, is there another place that I can go and get this data to work with? And then the next step would be to determine your purpose with this. Are you just exploring the data, trying to figure out broad trends, or are you asking a certain question about the data? And then a big thing to keep in mind is who is going to benefit from this work. So that kind of will shape, if you're just asking an exploratory question, there's a lot less kind of like cleaning, and you can do a little bit more informal analysis. But if you're obviously presenting to library stakeholders or as part of a research, you'd want to make sure that you're being even more careful with how you're handling the data and the assumptions that you're making, and then come up with a plan and get to work. So we'll do that here in a minute with Tableau. And then some important questions to keep asking as you work. Am I using the best format to communicate this data? Are these charts the right kinds of charts to be using? We'll talk a little bit about different charts and how they're valuable. I picked a number of different types of charts and visualizations to work with in this, so you can kind of see some different types of charts and also some different context for where you might use those. And then do the colors that I've used help make my point? Sometimes you're talking about the same type of data and you would want to use colors that either are the same colors to associate that data, or you're talking about differences in data. There's all sorts of color theories. You can ask, am I following pre-established color meanings? Do you have positive values, but you're color coding them with red colors? Would be an example of something like that. So red traditionally is a negative color. It means, you know, you have like red and green if you're looking at a chart for positive and negative. So there are certain conventions like that that are important to follow when you're making charts. I'm not going to go into all of the kind of design guidelines for this, but I have included in the resources some articles that I found really helpful for thinking about designing good visualizations. So my goal for this workshop is to spend more time talking about Tableau and actually working in Tableau than talking about the design principles behind it, but I've tried to put some resources in there so that you can also see the design principles. One big complaint I have with a lot of visualizations that I see is that too much is trying to be fit into a very small chart or visualization, and that just clutters it up. So we're going to talk a little bit about like making sure you have only the information you need to convey what you're trying to convey with the information and not going crazy. You can have a chart that has all sorts of information in it, but then it can get so cluttered that it doesn't even make sense to people anymore. And then lastly, I think it's important, am I being honest with my data? So to look at the data, you can do a lot with data that, to use data to make a point that is not actually true. And then I'll go on, I put this in the next slide, just to reiterate, don't lie with your data. This is kind of an infamous chart showing the number of gun deaths in Florida. And if you look at this, they enacted a standard ground law in 2005, and it looks like the data shows that the gun deaths decreased as a result of enacting the standard ground law. What the chart doesn't show is that this is the 0 axis here at the top, and then the 1,000 is at the bottom. So when they enacted the standard ground law, what happened was not that the deaths decreased, but that the deaths actually increased. And so it's the person who created this visualization had a rationale behind it based off of a different visualization of data that she saw and liked. But I think this is a pretty misleading chart here nonetheless. So just be aware of that when you're creating charts. It's pretty easy to make a chart look like it's saying something that it's not, and even completely the opposite. So without going too far down the ethics of this, that's an important thing to remember. Like, let the data show what the data shows, or as much as possible, work to do that. So we're gonna jump wow, I can't talk right now. We're about to jump into Tableau. But I just wanted to point out why Tableau. So Tableau, if you haven't downloaded it already, is a software that basically allows you to create visualizations really quickly and easily. It's a software that's really popular, especially in businesses. I know a lot of libraries are using it as well, but it's like an enterprise level software. So a lot of tech companies are using it. It's a good software to have on your resume, even as a librarian. You can say, hey, I know how to work with Tableau. Like I can do these kinds of visualizations and analysis. I find it really easy to use. There's kind of this weird learning curve right at the start. When I started using it, I was kind of frustrated, things didn't do what I thought they should do. Then I spent some time watching a couple of videos like 6 or 8 months ago and saw how the workflow goes. And then a lot of the things that I thought were really frustrating kind of made sense. So what I want to do today is kind of walk you through some of those things, some of the tricks that I've learned that I found really helpful. And then another thing that I think is great about Tableau, there's a large user community. So whether it's on the Tableau forums or there's actually a group of people called the Data Visualization Society. They have a Slack channel you can join where they're always constantly sharing different visualizations that they've created, or people are asking questions back and forth. And it's there's just this large user community around Tableau which essentially means that you have a lot of support if you're using Tableau, and a lot of questions that you'll probably have when you're using the platform have already been asked and answered by somebody else. So I think that's really important in the software. That's not to say it's the perfect catch-all. It's really expensive. It's great that they have this student license. It's free for a year if you're a student. I think it's like $800 a year if you're not a student, if you're just paying for it. But then also it's a proprietary software. So Tableau is ultimately out to make money. They're going to change versions. They're going to do all this other stuff. It's not an open source software in the sense that, you know, people are developing it and it's this opportunity for people to contribute to the platform. It is a proprietary thing. So there's dangers in kind of getting locked into one system. But I think when we're talking about it, especially because it's being used in so many places, you know, as we're students trying to learn and evaluate these different tools, it's a tool that you can put on your resume and say, hey, I've worked a little bit in Tableau and I know how to do this. So that's why I chose it for today. But without too much further ado, let's get into using it. I think the last slide here is my resources slide. Yeah, so I've thrown together a couple different introductions. Tableau actually has a page of relearning resources. Data Visualization Society is what I was mentioning. They have this journal, Nightingale. They also have a Slack channel. And then a couple articles. The import IO and the material IO articles really get into kind of the core of what types of charts to use in certain situations and the colors and stuff like that. So hopefully those will be helpful to you. But those resources will be available. I think these slides are going to be posted as well. So let me see if I can, I'm going to pause my screen sharing for a minute and jump over to Tableau. And we'll get rolling. If I can share the right screen. Is everybody able to see the Tableau screen here?
No.
No? Oh, I guess I have to hit share first.
That helps.
Now, okay, great. So when you open Tableau, this is what you'll see. I see a couple, okay, cool. The chat popped up. I just want to make sure everybody can see it. Okay, so when you open Tableau, this is kind of the layout you'll see. On the left side, you have some different options to connect to different files or servers. In the middle, you've got kind of a workspace here that shows you files that you've recently opened, and then there's some sample workbooks at the bottom that you can just try things that they've created. And then on the right side, there's this Discover tab that has some different tutorials or help documentation there. So that's really useful. Let me share, if you haven't got the Kaggle data set that we're going to work with, I think there was a link for that. But I was going to share this folder with the stuff in it, but it doesn't seem to want to work for me. Yeah, sorry
Brandon,
about that.
do you want me to add the link that you sent me to the chat?
Yeah, go ahead and do that. I was trying to share it so people wouldn't have to. A Kaggle account is free. Kaggle is basically an online repository where people can share different data sets. It's a great resource. I was just trying to make it so people didn't have to log in and download something, but that's, I apologize, my Google Drive is freezing and I'm not going to be able to share what I had planned to share. So if you need the data set, it's there. We're going to just get started here and go ahead and open the files. I apologize. I don't think I'm going to have time to stop and troubleshoot, but this is being recorded, this workshop. So if we move on and you're not quite ready to move on, or you want to come back to something, it'll be recorded, so you can do that later too. So don't worry if you're trying to keep up and all of a sudden your computer's slow, or if you don't have the thing downloaded yet, don't worry about that. But I think we're going to have to keep moving for time. So while I'm in this view, somebody had asked about SQL earlier and whether you can do SQL commands in Tableau. You can connect it to SQL servers here. I don't know, I have not used that functionality, but if you're working, like if you have a server that is, or data that's stored on a server somewhere, you can connect directly to that data, which is great. More of an enterprise level thing that we're gonna talk about. But the way that I've mostly used it is with connecting to a text file. And by a text file, it means like a .txt file or a .csv file or a .tsv if you're using tab separated value. But that's probably the most common thing that you'll be connecting to. So we're gonna open a text file here. And I'm gonna go into my library usage, which is the text file that comes, or the CSV file that comes in the Kaggle data set. And I'm just gonna hit open. And it's gonna open that file for me in this data source view. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to move things around a little bit on my end because I've got all of the Zoom controls overlaying my screen here as well. So we're in this data source view. You can see down in the bottom corner here, it's asking me to go to worksheet, which we'll do in a minute. But this is the view where your data is, and you can always come back to this data source tab to see the data. I'm gonna hit update now. It's gonna load this data in here. I just want to point out really quickly, up here at the top, you have the option of live or extract as your connections. If you hit extract, it's just going to make essentially a local copy of all of this data separate from the file. So I'm just going to keep it with live. The difference is if you were working with a file and that file got updated, it could either mess up your thing, or you can just update your visualizations based on the new data. So if you're working with like a CSV file and you go in there and change some stuff and then come back to Tableau, it'll all be updated as long as you have it a live connection to the file. If you are up here, one thing that's really cool, and this gets to exploring the data a little bit, you can see I have files here, it's connected to the file, and I can actually open this up right here and see the CSV file. So I can see the different rows at the top. I can see what information is in here. I believe this file is like 400 and some thousand rows. So one of the things that I really like about Tableau, it's much faster, I've found, than like Excel or numbers, especially working with CSV files that are huge. It does a really good job of parsing them very quickly. So you can see a lot of the data very fast. One thing that's important is to know kind of like some of these are like home library code. This is a very like esoteric numbering system here. We don't have a lot of detail about what the home library code actually is, at least in this CSV file, because that's not what CSV files are for. They're just for storing the actual data. So on Kaggle, it has all the definitions, and I copied them over into a sheet, and I'm realizing it's not going to let me just jump to this sheet and share it. But you can copy, I copied the definitions over into a pages file that lets me see what each of those definitions are. So I'll just read, for instance, the definition for total checkouts here is one of the fields. So in the definitions, and I don't think everybody can see this, but it says total checkouts is the total number of items that the patron has checked out from the library since the record was created. So that essentially is just keeping track of all of the different numbers of things that each person has checked out. They will appear as different rows here if the patron has checked out multiple things in this data set. But yeah, so you can see what any of those fields actually are based on the definition. And again, that's when you download the data set from Kaggle, they have all of those field definitions on Kaggle. One other thing that I wanted to point out before we actually get into making sheets, this filter function up here. So this data set, if you look at the circulation active year, we've got 2013 here, 2015, 2016, and you'll see Tableau doesn't really know what this number is. It just assumes that it's a generic number. It doesn't know that that's a year stamp. You can click on this little number thing here, and you can tell it that it's a different thing. If it's a number that should have decimal points, you can tell it that. If it's a date, you can tell it that. If it's just a generic string, you can tell it that. If it's a Boolean true or false value, say you have a 1 or a 0, you can tell it this is a Boolean true or false, which just affects as you're working with the data later. But we don't really need to change that right now. We can just leave it as 2015, even though it's looks a little wonky, but it's not going to affect how we're actually using it in this case. But what I can do, because I have all of this data goes through 2016, but it doesn't complete the year 2016. It stops about halfway through in like August or something. So, and I know that just because I had looked through the data a little bit more beforehand. So I want to use a full year's worth of data. Since 2016 is not a full year, we're going to use 2015 data. So I'm going to go up here to my filters and say, add a filter, and I want the circulation active year. And I want to say, I want the year to be 2015. Oops, I don't know if I typed that wrong or if it just didn't like what I did. 2015. So I'm shortening that to say, disregard anything from 2003 to 2016. Again, it looks a little funky because it doesn't know that it's a year, but that's okay. It still is going to do the same thing in this case. So circulation active year, I want from 2015 to 2015. And that's going to give me only the rows that apply. Now you can see this is all filtered out. So now all the records that I have are from 2015. So the reason I did that is just because otherwise we're starting to compare data. If you're comparing data from 2016 with data from 2003, you can get some wonky numbers or like totals are going to be off. This just helps us to kind of limit the scope of what we're working with. So you can click on a field here to rename it. If a field comes in and it's named a little funky, you can rename it to whatever you want. I think I just left them all kind of this way. You can do a lot of renaming at later steps too. So unless you really have a desire to have the field name something specific, I would just leave it. So let's get to the worksheets. So down at the bottom here by data source, we have go to worksheet. I'm just going to make a sheet. So it comes up and it says sheet number 1. And I know what I want this sheet to be. I want this sheet, we're going to look at the age ranges first. So really quickly on this sheet, we have got a couple things here. We've got our data on the left, and you can see we have all these different fields. These are the same fields that were in the other view, across the top with all of the values down in the columns, but now we just see the field titles. So we have dimensions and measures, and the difference here, Tableau assumes that it's one or the other, but you can change it. Like I can say this age range, I can say convert to a measure, and it'll drop it down to the measures part. Really, the way that I think is the most easy to explain the difference between a dimension and a measure. A dimension is something more qualitative that you'll be using to slice the data by, and then a measure is something aggregated. So like if we're looking at, so take for instance, this circulation active year. This actually shouldn't be in a measure. I can bring this up to dimension because that's a characteristic that we want to be able to look at the data by. Versus the total checkouts, we would just want the sum of the checkouts or the average of the checkouts. We're actually quantifying that data. So that's like a measure. We would actually look at some kind of measure that the data is representing. So I think it'll become a little bit more clear as we start working on it. They function in a lot of the same ways, and obviously you can convert them back and forth, so it's not a huge difference for us right now. But I just wanted to point out some things may show up as a dimension that should be measures, and some things may show up as measures that should be dimension. You'll get the hang of it as you're working with it, and you can convert them back and forth later. So really quickly, the first thing that I want to do, we're going to look at the ages. So right here, our first dimension is age range. And I'm just gonna click that and drag it over into the worksheet. And it's gonna show me the different values that we have for age range. And it says ABC because this is a string field. It's not like a number field or anything like that, it's a string. So this is not super useful to us yet. It's just the, like literally telling us what the different values are in that field. But then we can go down here and say the number of records. So this is probably the thing that you'll use the most, this number of records measure, because this is going to split out each of those things and tell us how many records are in each of those things. So all I'm gonna do is drag this number of records and put it up in the columns. And then all of a sudden, it tells me how many records are in each category. You can see the data is flipped on its side right now, and unfortunately, my Zoom bar is in the way. So let me see, hang on one second. I don't know if it'll stop sharing. Can somebody unmute real quick and tell me if it's still shared, my screen?
It's still shared.
Okay, let me just bring this window in then, because I can, oh, it got really big. I can view it like this, hopefully, and work with the controls a little bit better. The Zoom controls were blocking everything. So up in the top, there is a swap rows and columns. So if I want to see this instead of as a horizontal chart, I can see it as a vertical chart. So now I can see these are the number of checkouts. So when it says number of records, what we're talking with, and this is again going back to knowing what your data is, each row represents somebody checking out an item in the library. So people who were in, library patrons who were in the 0 to 9-year-old age range checked out, it says 38,242 items. People in the 25 to 34-year-old age range checked out 91,083 items. So we can see how many items each of those things are. And then over here, this is just the generic name for what we pulled from over here, but we can tell it, this is, oops, now it comes up. We can say title, this is the number of items checked out. So we can rename that and remind ourselves, okay, what actually are we looking at here? And then you can see this null thing. So these are records that were checked out without any kind of indication of how old the person was, or they just didn't have that data there. So for this one, we're just gonna click on null and we can say exclude that, because we're only interested in knowing these ones here. And I think the null, actually I'm gonna go back and look real quick. So it's 215 records there, which is not a lot. Sometimes you have to be really careful with what if you're just ignoring all nulls, you could miss something that's really important in the data. In this case, just to show, to have a little bit cleaner picture, I'm just gonna exclude it. But there we go. This is a really basic chart. All of it's showing is the number of items based on how, the age range that the patron falls into. And really quickly, we could do this with a circle chart. I'm gonna go here in this show me. It gives you a bunch of different charts that you can see. So I could do this as a circle chart and see this. The problem with this is it's pretty unclear. People are really bad at recognizing how big each slice of the pie chart is. So it's visually really hard to compare two different slices. This slice looks kind of similar to this slice, 52,000, 58,000. But visually, it's a lot more clear if you can put them along a horizontal axis or a vertical axis and see where they reach up to. So I would use pie charts very sparingly. I'm going to show you in one other example how to use it, but I would use it pretty sparingly. Same thing goes for something like these packed bubbles. I think this is a really cool visual, but it's very hard to actually gain something out of this visualization here. It's cool to look at, and each of the bubbles, the size of the bubble represents how many items were checked out comparatively. But it's really hard to compare the different categories because it sorts them in a little bit of a weird way. And visually, it's hard to compare them one against the other. So when you're comparing quantitative data like this, I think a great way is to show it in a chart like this, where you've got kind of this bucket for each one of these age ranges. Again, same thing, like you could put this in a line chart and see that, but this is not really a continuous line or spectrum. In some sense it is, because it's age and you are going from youngest to oldest. But I think this data makes the most sense for this chart in a bar, where you're looking at the actual grouping. how many check out for each age range. So there's the first one. Let's look at something else in the data. So I'm going to go down here, make a new sheet. This time I want to look at how people are receiving their notifications. So I'm going to drop this notification code in, but this code doesn't really mean anything to me unless I go back to that Kaggle documentation and see, okay, what does this code actually mean? I have no idea what A, P, and Z mean. So that's not good. So let's instead go to notice preference definition. And I think I'm going to see, yeah. So this is the same data. It matches up with the code, but this actually gives me a definition for it. Same thing, I'm going to grab the number of records here and put it up here in the columns. And I get that same visual. So some people have no preference listed. Again, for right now, we're just going to exclude these because it's such a small number. And that could be an interesting thing later in visualization, but for right now, we're just going to focus on people who have them listed and see the breakdown. Because there's only a few of these, I think it's okay. This is where I want to show you some of the functionality with a circle chart. So now we've got this circle. We don't really, you can hover over it and see what these things are, but it's pretty unclear as it is right now. I forgot to name the sheet. I'm just going to call this sheet notification preferences. And it adds the sheet name here. You can double click on this and change it if you want the title of the chart to be something different than the sheet name, but we'll just leave it for now. And this is where Tableau gets really interesting. This is some of the stuff that I did not know when I first started using it and found it very frustrating. So I want to walk through some of how you do this. I want to get labels here so I can see what these things are without having to hover over it. So the way you do it is not all that intuitive, but then once you do it, it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go back over here to notice preference definitions. And that's because those are the things that I want labeled. I want it to say print, email, whatever. All I'm going to do is grab that and drop it right on the label. And boom, it calculates the labels for me. So again, all I did, and then you can see it down here. It's got the label here of notice preference definition. I'm going to take that off and do it again. So I'm going to drop in the notice preference definition. Oops, I did the wrong thing, sorry. Let me drop it on the label and it shows them there. We can also do the code and see that. I mean, they'll line up. One disappeared because the chart's not quite big enough to show it. The way that you can to always display regardless of how big or small the chart is, but I'm just going to make it a little bigger to see it. So now we can see A is print, P is phone, Z is email, but we don't really need those. So I'm going to take those out. So let's say now I want to see the percentage of those things. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the number of records, which was what each of the size of the thing represents. And I'm going to say, let's label those as well. So now I can see, okay, I've got 31,336 print, 68,172 phone, 323,000 email. So obviously email is a lot. Those numbers they kind of don't mean anything to me right now. What if I wanted to see percentages of like what percentage of people are using phone to be notified? I can go in here and say, down in my label, click on the label. There's this little menu tab here. And I say, I want a quick table calculation. And all I want is the percent of the total. I click that, and then it gives me the percentages here. Instead of telling me the actual number, and then I can come back in here and say, no, clear that out. I just want the actual number. But I can go in, quick table calculation, percent of the total. We'll get into a chart later that gets a little bit more technical about that. This gets a little weird if you start to have a couple different things that you're looking at the same time. But for now, that works. So now we can see 7% of the people are notified by print. A little over 16 are notified by phone, but the majority of people in this library system in the year 2015 are being notified by email. So that gives us some insight into how our patrons are using the library. It's kind of abstract for us right now because we're not involved. But if we wanted to say, okay, well, maybe we want to push more people being notified by email, so we have less phone messages that we have to make, or less mail that we have to send out. So then we could say, hey, look at only 76% of our people are notified by email. Let's make a target of, at the end of the year, 80% of people are notified by email rather than 76. And then we could go 2015 and see how many people, and then 2016 and see how many people, and see if we hit that mark. Let's do something else. Monthly checkouts. I'm going to make a sheet here and say circulation active month. I'm going to put this up here. I can see all my different months. Same thing, number of records. Now, I've got all of my checkouts by the months. And I'm looking at this, and all of a sudden, this doesn't look right. Let me make sure I filtered my, oh, my data source doesn't show filtered. I wonder why. Anyway, I'm going to go back in and filter my circulation active year. Sorry about that. We'll figure that out. I just want 2015 data. Make sure circulation active year. And then I'm going to go back over here. Yeah, this is closer to the chart that I was using earlier. Okay. The only thing that I did there, it was taking the data from all of the different years. So any difference here, like if August is different every year, is the most every year, it's going to just keep compounding. So that's why there was like a big spike in August, was because over time, there was just a lot more checkouts in August than there were in the other months. But I'm going to rename this sheet to be monthly checkouts. And I'm going to do a couple other things with this sheet because I want to show a couple more functionalities that we have here. This is the case. Instead of, the bars work pretty well here. We can kind of see the trend of what is happening. But this is a case where I may not use the bar. I may do a line. So I can see a little bit more clearly what's happening at these different points. And again, this line doesn't really tell me all that much. I can't really see what's going on. So let me grab this label again. One thing that I could do is just grab this one and drag it down because this is what I want. But if you're on a Mac, I'm not sure the hotkey to do it on a PC. If you're on a Mac, you can press Command. If I just drag this down right now and say label, it actually takes that out of the rows marker. And this is where I got confused and frustrated when I was just learning Tableau. But I'm gonna undo that. If I grab it and hold Command as I grab it and bring it down, it makes a copy of that field. And so then it just gives me those different number points. I can do the same thing here too. I can label these with the months so I can actually see what the month was. But it's a little crowded. I can kind of see the points at the bottom. I'm gonna take that out for right now. Another thing that you can do, this chart, there's not a lot of variance here because I'm starting at 0. There's nothing even close to 0 checkouts in these months. So I can click on this axis and say, I'm gonna double click there and say, give me a fixed axis. Instead, the lowest one that I'm seeing is 5189. The highest is 8023. So let's just say we're gonna go from 4,500 to 8,500. And all this is doing is changing our axis. So we don't have 0 to 8,000 or whatever the top one was. And it shows us a little bit more clearly where our busiest month is. Again, this is getting back to the don't lie with the data. Like don't just change that arbitrarily to make it look like something is different. But this would allow you to have a little bit more zoomed in picture of what's going on here. Now, say you want to just know what the average is for all of these months together. So I can go up in this analytics tab here by data, and it gives me a couple different options here. I can, I'm not a statistician, but you can do box plots. You can do a lot of like quartiles, a lot of statistics kind of stuff. All I want is an average line. So I'm going to just click it, drag it over, drop it in here, and it's going to give me an average. So the average for 2015 was 6,600 checkouts per month. It's kind of cool. It makes it very easy to do. Let's do another one. Next thing I want to look at. Let's go back to the example of emails. So one of the fields here is provided an email address. I'm going to drop that in. It's just a true or false field. So let's look at the number of records that have that. I'm going to flip it around so I can see it here. So we've got some, 61,000 have provided emails, 17,600 have not provided emails. One way that we could look at this, I'm going to take this provided email and just, these are completely different things. I'm not looking at the same thing. These are opposites. So I'm going to put this on the color one, and it's going to assign each of those variables a different color. So now I can see I'm talking about two different things, whether you do have an email or don't have an email. And then going back to kind of the color theory thing here, let's say that if you don't have an email, I'm going to make it red. And if you do, I'm going to make it green for like yes, yes, and no. So here's the people who do have an email. Here's who don't. This is a cool chart, but what if I wanted to stack it and see kind of how it breaks down? So I can go to show me, and then we've got stacked bars here. So instead of just the regular horizontal bars, I can do stacked bars. So now I can see the total number of records is about 80,000. 17,000 of those are false, and 61,000 are true. That's sort of useful information. Let me bring this out a little bit so we can see this. Sort of useful, but it'd be much more useful if I had the percentage numbers there. So let me just, I'm going to label this. Actually, I want to label it with the email. So here's true and false. But then I also want to add a label that tells me the percentages of these things. So I can go back here and say label. Now I have those numbers that tell me how many each of the things are, how many records don't have an email associated or how many do. And then I'm going to go back in here, do the same thing we did earlier, quick table calculation, % of total. And you can still see on this bar, it's giving me the total numbers, not the 100% marking. So I can also change this. I believe it's just by double clicking if it comes up. And now I'm forgetting how to do it. I thought it was going to do it when I changed this other thing and it didn't, but you can see the labels here. So I wonder if I do it there. Nope. Well, apologies for that. This is looking a little different than what I had in my example, and I'm not exactly sure what I did to get this sidebar change to be percentages. Maybe. See if it, nope, it's not going to give me the option. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it. That's less important because we can see the percentages here. So 22% of people have not provided an email, 77% of people have provided an email. Interesting that this 77 is different than the 76 or 74, because now we're working with 2015 data. 74% of people who want to be notified by that email. It's relatively close, so you could say most people who put an email in there want to be notified by email, but you could also have an initiative where you say, let's get this number up to 80 that we have email addresses on record for. And that could involve helping people to make emails or just encouraging patrons to give an email when they check something out. The last thing I want to do before we do a dashboard, this is going to get a little bit more into the weeds. I actually had not done a spatial file until yesterday. I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly. You can come back to it afterwards in the recording. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second data source here. The data set that I downloaded from Kaggle had a spatial file with it. So I'm going to go in here, Shapefile, and it blocks out, it tells me which one it wants. And I'm going to say open this Shapefile. And I'm going to see if I can do this right because it took me a little bit yesterday. I'm going to look in this Shapefile and just see what the columns are. So I see this supervisor column, and it's got decimal points here. And that one, I'm going to assume if I do the same thing for the CSV file I was looking at originally, I also have a supervisor column, but there's no decimal points. So it's not going to join quite right. Like that's the column that I want to join these two fields on. I want to know what spatial section is associated with each record here. But what I'm going to do is I can see the colors. So these orange fields are represented by this spatial file, and then the blue fields are with my library usage one. So I'm going to go over and change that supervisor district. I believe that was the right field. And I'm going to say, oops, it's not giving me the option there. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I think that was the right one. And if it's not going to let me do this, then we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But this would be to get the actual shapefile associated with the CSV file. Let me just try minimizing my screen here for 1 second, because it should give me more options there, and it's not wanting to. All right, we're gonna go join supervisor district is equal to the supervisor. Oh, here we go, decimal. Okay, update that. So it couldn't join before because my supervisor district field did not have the same decimal points that the supervisor field had in the other data set. But now, since I changed that to have the decimal points rather than being a whole number, then it said, okay, now I recognize that you're trying to join the same field, and I'm going to join this data set. We're not going to get into the outer joins, inner joins, all of that. I'm just doing a full outer join here for anybody who does know what that means. So I get all of the values in both of the data sets. But then what I can do in a new sheet, and this was pretty cool. I hadn't done this before. Like I said, yesterday was the first time that I had played around with it. Now you can see I have this new file in here as well. This is my spatial file, and I just dragged and dropped it here, and it gives me that district. So I can see now, this is San Francisco. These are the different things, the different districts. I'm gonna take that, and I think I just dropped it onto, no, I guess I didn't drop that onto the color. I took the supervisor district, or supervisor district, dropped it onto the color, and then I think it's gonna color each one of those differently. So I can see the different districts. I can also do it label with the name. Oh, that's the actual person. Let me do the number, supervisor district 5. I think this number is that's not the same one. One of them gave me a much more simple number. I think this is summing, and I just want the actual district. There we go. It still has the decimal places, but this is district 1, district 7, district 8. So what I can do is see, again, the number of records. And I think I just dropped this up here. Nope, that is not how I did it. Let me see. I have my other thing open to the side. I'm going to change this to the total number of checkouts. Instead of coloring just by the different districts, I'm going to color how many checkouts each of the districts had. And then it's going to give me this filter over here so I can see. So districts that had more checkouts are darker shaded. Districts with less checkouts are lighter shaded. So you can see this district, just by looking at this, you can easily see where the most checkouts occur. This district had 1 million checkouts, as opposed to these lighter ones. This district only had 350,000 checkouts. Now you can overlay this with a lot of other geographic or demographic data, and see there's probably other reasons. Maybe there's more libraries in this district. Maybe it's a more affluent. These are all questions that you can start to ask of your data when you look at it in this context. But we can see this data had more checkouts than the other districts. So I want to move on to doing a dashboard really quickly. I'm sorry, we're running a little bit out of time, but to create a dashboard, it would be down here. Let me name this really quick. I'm going to just call this districts. And then this other one was emails provided. So instead of clicking a new sheet, I'm going to create a dashboard. So what a dashboard is a collection of sheets that allows you to see a lot of these things at the same time. We're just going to put this up here. I'm going to put a title. We're going to call this 2015 San Francisco Public Library Usage Report, because we're giving a couple of statistics on how people are using the library. San Francisco. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay, there we go. We've got our big title. That's not letting me resize. Well, so we have our sheets over here. So here's our age ranges one, our notification preferences, our monthly checkouts, whether or not people provide emails, and then the districts. I think this is a kind of a cool district or a cool visualization to start with. So I'm going to just click it and drag it, and it's going to give me the option of kind of where to place it. I'm going to say let's place it down here at the bottom, and you can see it popped up with a bunch of different options. It's kind of where you want that block to fall, and this is a little bit frustrating. I still don't quite have the hang of it, but you can create with these objects, you can create these blocks within which you can work. So I'm going to put that one there. And this is what I mean. So now if I grab, say, the age ranges and I want to put it to the side, I can either put it to the side of this districts ones, I can put it in between these, I can put it in beside both of these. I just want it beside right here so I can see this. I'm going to actually get rid of this little box here. That was only applying to one thing, and I want it. I want that space for something else. And make the title a little bit smaller so it fits all in the top. So now I've got districts and age range. Let's say I put my monthly checkouts down here so I can see what's happening there. My notifications, let's put down here. And then maybe whether or not people provided their emails. I'm going to drop that there. Delete that container over there so I have a little more room to work. You can see right off the bat, this one, because we resized it to get all those fields, it's not playing super nice with how we want it to lay out here. I could go back in the notifications preferences sheet and toy around with that a little bit, make it a little bit smaller and see if that helps on the dashboard. I don't want to lose that print one, but yeah, there we go. Now we don't have the sliders here. So yeah, so now I have this dashboard, and this is where Tableau gets really powerful and really cool. In this dashboard, I'm going to click on this, and then I'll say use as filter. And I'm going to say use that one as filter, use this one as filter, and use this one as filter. And this is why I say it gets really powerful here. Make this so it's not weird. Say I want to know, let's talk about this district here, right? This has the most checkouts. Let's see what the demographics are. So our demographics as a whole look like this. So there's kind of this spike in the 25 to 30-year-olds, and then some older people, but not as much. But let's look at this district specifically. So now, since I told the dashboard to use this as a filter, if I click on this, it's going to filter all of these other sheets by that supervisor district. So if I click this, all of these other things change. My monthly checkout, I don't know why that went away. But you can see the demographics changes slightly to represent, that's the demographics of who's actually living there. So I'm going to put that back, and there you can see the records. Again, I'm not quite sure why my months are disappearing. I'll have to figure that out. But I can filter by these different districts and see what's going on with the demographics. Alternatively, I can say, okay, well, let's see if I want to just see this age range. I can click that. It's going to highlight that. And then I can see their notifications, they are much more likely to be notified by email as opposed to print or by phone. Let's look at something that would probably be the opposite. I'm going to generalize here, but if we look at an older population, much less likely to be notified by email, much more likely to be notified by phone. So these are some insights that you could give. You can see here already, also the emails provided is way down. We don't have nearly as many emails, which makes sense because they're maybe less likely to have emails or less likely to check them or add them as a primary notification. We can go back to this age group and see that. We can also grab multiple of these. I'm just going to hold Command on a Mac and do that, or you can click out of that and grab them by highlighting and doing that way. You can filter and see what's going on. Over here, I can say, hey, just tell me what's going on from June to August. Let's see what's going on here. And you can see it changes the total number of checkouts. So you can still see this is still the most active, at least visually it looks like the most active. This is pretty active as well, but that way you can use this dashboard to kind of get insights into specific parts of the year when you do the filter by. The last thing I'll show, and then we'll do questions. I know we're almost out of time here. I can stay on a little longer if people have questions or want to talk. Is the bins, because this is pretty important. So I have all these months, but say I don't want the months, I just want the seasons. So I can go up here and say, in circulation active months, actually I'm gonna do it over here. I can say, create a group. And in this group, I'm gonna make a group and I'm gonna call this group winter. And then I'm going to make another group, call it, oops, cancel, spring, group for summer. I did add to again, rename summer, and then group add to, no, not add to, apologize, fall. And let's just say, because this is 2016, we're not, where did all my groups go? Sorry, we'll just do this again. Winter, because this is all 2016 data, I'm just gonna start, I don't know if this is quite right or off, but we'll do April or January, February, and March, and then we'll do a group for spring, and have this be April. My values are getting all jumped around here. Spring, April. I'm sorry, everybody. I should have had these groups done ahead of time. You can add different things to different groups. Let's just go, I'm gonna ungroup all of these. I'm just gonna say, let's make a group of spring, April, February, March, good to go. So let's say we want to see spring versus all the other months. So now I have this group one here, and I can put this up here and say, get rid of that one. So I can group the data and see, these are the ones that were only in the spring. This is not looking right. I apologize, I'm rushing through that. I can go back and do that after the time, but I wanna open up for questions really quick to answer questions people might have about this before we have to go too late. But that is essentially how you would create the different sheets and create a dashboard. I know this is kind of a crash course overview, so I apologize for that, but yeah, what questions do you have that we can talk about right now? And when you're asking a question, just unmute and say maybe your name. I don't have the videos up, so I apologize for that. But yeah.
Hi, Brandon.
Hey, Alejandro.
It's me, Alejandro. Can you show us how you joined the geospatial file with the other data again? Can
Sure.
you put the process?
Yeah, sorry, that was I was trying to go really fast. Basically, I don't know if anybody has taken databases. When you join, you're looking for one column in one data set that matches another column in another data set. So in this data set, I had looked through the data sets ahead of time. So I'm gonna go back. Can you all still see my Zoom screen, like my Tableau window? I see a lot of nods here. Okay, so I'm gonna go in this library usage one and just look at what my fields are in this one. And I know that I have supervisor fields in the other one, so I just want to find something, and I have this supervisor district field here. So that's the field I think that's going to match up with the other one. And actually, let me change it back, because right now I've already changed it to work. Let me go change this back. I have supervisor district. It was a whole number in the original data set. So now it's like broken. I got this like exclamation point. It's like, hey, we can't match these things. So the reason it can't match it is because when I'm here looking at this, here's my supervisor district field, and it's these whole numbers. But I know that each one of these numbers represents a supervisor district that patron is associated with, or that the checkout was associated with. I'm gonna go over here to my spatial data, and it actually has some tabular data as well. Here I have that supervisor field. So I could do this the other way around too. I just need this supervisor field to look like the other supervisor field. It's the same numbers, just this one Tableau assumed that it was a decimal pointed number, so it put decimal points there. Up here, I can see my two files represented with this like icon. So I can either join inner join, which means you can see here, this is data source. This is like my main file and then my spatial file. Inner join would be any item from the regular data file that has that supervisor row that matches a row in this other one. Take only the rows that are matched in both. I don't want that here because there are some other fields in this one that I would lose. A left join means keep all of them in this one and then keep anything in the second file that matches. The right join is the complete opposite. It says keep only the fields from this first one that also match something in the next one. Or the full outer join says, I don't care, keep everything from the first one and everything for the second one and match where you can. So I'm gonna do the full outer join just for this. There's a whole other context and conversation for why you would choose one of these different joins. I would say if you're just trying to get data out, just do a full outer join so you make sure you don't cut out any data that might be important. But again, I still have nothing here because my fields aren't matched up. So the other time I went and changed this field to not be, or to have decimal points, because right now this field does not have decimal points, it's just a whole number. I think I can go over here and say, let me look at which field it was again, because these are all named so similarly. So in this geo file, it's the supervisor field, not the soup name or the soup dist, it's the supervisor. So I can say, if I look here, this is gonna say a decimal, which is why I can't link it up because it doesn't know that they're the same thing. So I'm gonna tell it, no, actually this is a whole number and it doesn't work. So let's do it the other way again. So I'm gonna change it over in this one to say, hey, by the way, this is a decimal. Now it knows, okay, even though this is decimal, it matches the same field over here, 11 and 11. So now those things these two data sets are joined on that one. So when I'm talking about the spatial data, it knows that, okay, look in the spatial data, I have an 11 that's matched up with this row over here in the actual usage data. That's how that works. Beyond that, Alejandro, honestly, I'm not gonna be able to go into a ton more detail because most of the analysis that I've done has not been with spatial data like this. I got it for this specific example because I thought it'd be cool to see an overlay of San Francisco and the data set happened to have a spatial file. So I'm not gonna be able to go into too much more data about how those things are joined or about what the actual spatial file looks like. But does that help to answer your question about joining them?
Yeah, it does. I do have one more question related to that.
Yeah.
So if let's say in a hypothetical scenario, I could join the files by another field or column, how would I select that other field?
Yeah, so up here, when you tell it where to join, you would say join on whatever field in the first file, or like your main file, whatever one that you open up first, and then equals or is greater than whatever field in the next one. So I think you have greater than, equal to, not equal to. So you have some different ways that you can join. But really, if you're talking about, joining multiple files, you would want to join on a field that basically exists, in a database. You're joining on a field that exists essentially in both of your tables. You can think of it as kind of that way. So to join on something, you would kind of need something that is referenced in both of the different files. So that's why I use the supervisor one, because that signifies the same values in both of those files. In the geospatial one, it's giving the supervisor number to that district, and in the checkouts record, it's giving what supervisor one it's associated with. So those are representing the same entities, and that's why you can join them together. You can see, obviously, the geo file, if I look at it, there's only like 11 rows in here. It doesn't have as many. So basically, wherever the first file has a 2, it's going to join the rest of this information in there. But if you had a column that in the library usage file that said, supervisor name instead, you could use that. But then the names change over the course of, we're looking at data from 2003 all the way to 2016. So the chances are the supervisors are going to change. The districts won't change as much, or if at all. So does that answer that one?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. What other questions or things that, like, we can even do like a quick ad hoc, like if there's like, oh, I wonder, you know, I see we have this field here. What does this field look like, or what kind of chart would you make? I can even try to do a little ad hoc one too. Actually, go for it.
Brandon, Matthew here. I have a question. In your PowerPoint example, you had a chart that was animated.
Yeah.
Is there a way to create that in here?
You know what, Matthew? Honestly, I'm sure there is. I've not done it. So I'll show you one other thing that you can do. That with Tableau, there's this whole other section called, let me go to this monthly one, because I think, and I'm gonna get this weird bin that I didn't create right out of here. Circulation active month. So you can animate a lot of different things. If you're in your dashboard, there's a whole thing. I'm going to try to remember where it is. They're called actions. You can see here, ignore actions. That like would be because we're filtering out some different things. There's this whole other set of commands that you can use in Tableau called actions, where it actually will run through a sequence of things when you press play. Essentially like, you know, a PowerPoint thing where it's just executing slides and changing slides based off of the timer. There's a lot of different automations you can do in here. I've only used actions for a couple different things, and not even a lot, like I wouldn't be able to go into detail about that. But I can show you one other thing that I didn't talk about too much, and that is a filter. So if I have filters here, and I want filter, I'm gonna add this circulation month as a filter. And then I'm gonna say, yeah, keep them all. And I'm gonna hope it pops up, and of course it doesn't. There we go, show filter. So now I've added this. This is the same thing that I'm looking at, the circulation active month, but now I have it over a filter on the side. I can say all, or I can say just give me April, May, and June, and see what those are. And I can also change this filter. Instead of being a multi-valued list, I can have it as a slider. So I can say, show me from June, a single value slider, or I can say a multi-valued slider. Where is that? Or maybe not multi-valued slider. Not a wildcard match. There's another one that gives you, oh, it's because, I know why. We didn't change, it's not seeing this as a date, it just thinks it's a string. If you have these things listed as actual date timestamps, you could like, there's like a date slider, but it's not coming up here because we didn't go back and tell it, like in the data source. We can go back in here and let's do this real quick. I'm gonna go to, that field was the, let's do this, circulation active month here. It just thinks this is a string. I'm gonna tell it this is actually a date. And I think it's just gonna give me, oops. There we go. Oh, it doesn't know the year, so it just assumed that it was 1900. Not exactly what we want, but let's see if it still works for this case. Yeah, that's not exactly what I wanted it to be. I wonder if I can take the year off here pretty quickly, and if not pretty quickly, I'm not going to bother with it.
You wouldn't want date there.
Say that, Alejandro. Say it again.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like a category to, you know, because we already have the year, so you would have to.
Yeah, this is where the calculations come in a bit. Like you could tell it month of this thing. There we go. So now this field that it calculated, this is the month, right? Does that make sense? So I went in, I sold this thing be a year, but it thought it was 1900 because there was no other year associated with it. So I just said, okay, just get the month. I don't care about the year. I just want the month. So we'll go back to monthly checkouts. And then I have that month. Where did it go? Circulation active year. Oh, here we go, month. It thinks it's a number, but that's okay. Not some. There we go. So now I can see the same data with the months in the bottom. And then make a filter and say, for right now, I want to keep all the values. And then I'm going to say, show this filter over on the side. And now I can see it's, I'd have to go back in there and like I could rename things or have it do different things, but I can see this break down a little bit differently now. If I want, you know, month 4 to 8, how it's performing. But you could go back in there and change all of that. Some of the automation stuff would be like with these filters. You don't have to just filter what you're looking at either. So I'm going to pull this month out of here and show what I mean by that. On these sheets, I'm going to put the regular circulation active month back in here, even though it's like, now it thinks it's a year, but it's okay. I want the month. There we go. Let me see if I can just have it not do the whole, not do this whole thing. Just give me the month. There we go. Okay, so say I'm looking at this one. I'm trying to remember what I was going to show with the filter. If I want, I can also filter by the patron type. So I'm just going to add this patron type filter here. Say all for now, put it over here. And then show the filter over on the side. And this lets me basically choose, like say I want it to be a single value dropdown. So this lets me choose, okay, I want to see anybody who is a visitor to the library. Maybe they don't allow visitors to check things out. Or let's say senior. And I don't know what these values are because I haven't gone. Oh, it's also messing up because remember we changed the axis here. So let me go back and just say automatic. So I can see, you know, books by mail, how many checkouts were there? Not very many. But you can see the different, you know, monthly checkouts based on these things. And then when you're in your dashboard, because I've added that filter in, I'm going to say, you know, we had that patron type filter. I can put it over here and do the same things. Right now, I think this filter only applies to, it only applies to that one worksheet that we had made the filter on, but we could make this filter apply to all. So we could just say selected worksheets and then go through here and say, hey, I want it to apply to all these different worksheets that are represented in this book or the dashboard. So like if we look at our adult users, we can see just that. Interestingly, the adult users does not change the age range that much. I guess a little bit here, but there's still like some records. So something might be a little off in how they're describing adult users or different things. Or you could, you know, add in different things if you wanted to see multiple users, but that's how you can add a filter or do that. And then I'm just gonna click all so we got all the data back. Matthew, sorry, that was kind of a departure from the question that you asked. But yeah, the long answer is I'm sure if you find a YouTube video, somebody's gonna walk through how to do those animations. I've seen somebody animated Igor Stravinsky's The Firebird, and they had the orchestra playing, and whenever an instrument had a part and they were playing the part, the instrument like became less, or became like fully shaded in, and it was like a little bit transparent if it wasn't playing at that moment. So you can see the whole orchestra like lighting up at different times, representing which instruments we're playing. That's all using actions. But I don't have the background or knowledge of how to actually make that work.
No, that's okay. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I have kind of a hard question. I was wondering, do you know how to make a spatial file? Do you know how that works?
No, I don't. I know that if you're using like ArcGIS or Esri or like QGIS is the open source GIS program, they can generate those files. Or I don't off the top of my head know. I know that Tableau is using here OpenStreetMap. So I'm assuming there's a way that Tableau is integrated with OpenStreetMap where you can just bring in any kind of map to overlay different values on. But in terms of how you actually create that file and the polygons, that's not something I know. I wish I did, but I don't know how to actually make that other than going into one of those programs and exporting a spatial file that you can find or download through there. So sorry, I don't have a better answer for you there, Sarah.
No worries, thank you.
Yeah.
Brandon, it's
Anybody
Carolina.
else?
By the way, I've had data scientists explain measures and dimensions to me in a way I did not understand, so you fixed that today. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I'll let others ask more questions, but as they do that, if you wouldn't mind quickly tabbing into the districts workbook, district sheet again, and I'll just take a quick screenshot. Thank you. That was it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I can share, I'll share this workbook file too. I'm trying to think of where the best place to share this would be. How about if you want this, I can share this whole like Tableau file. If you want to just send me an email, it's bellanti@simmons.edu. Just my last name that's there on the video. And then I can send you the actual like Tableau file that is saved. Then you can, use that as a starting point. So anybody who wants the file, if you want that, just email me and I'll respond with it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or things you want to see?
Hi, Mary Jane. I have a kind of a quick question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could like map like a relational database in Tableau, or if it's just kind of like maps and charts and things like that, or is that more of like a lucid chart, like MySQL kind of thing?
So you're talking about creating an entity relationship diagram?
I kind of like it's just if you wanted to like map a database and just see like kind of how all the branches,
the structure of it.
Kind of like yeah.
I haven't done that. I'm trying to think.
It might not be the best tool, but I just didn't know if it was possible.
Yeah, I'm sure if you look I'm sure somebody's done it in the Tableau community, and I know that there are people have done like network analysis and having different things that are connected in different ways. I haven't done that, and I don't know exactly how you would do that in Tableau. I've done a lot of those diagrams, but I mostly use Lucidchart to do it. So there probably is a way, Mary Jane. I'm not sure what it would be.
Okay, Lucidchart
yeah,
works.
I would suggest I don't know what the actual address is for the Tableau community forums, but there's a lot of answers on there. Like a lot of people are doing cool stuff. There's also public Tableau. Tableau has a public server essentially where people can upload visualizations they've made. They have a visualization of the week, which is where I saw that Stravinsky visualization. But you can get on there and see all sorts of cool things that people have done. Also the Nightingale Society, which is in the slides, that's the Data Visualization Society. They have all sorts of stuff that they're constantly outputting of examples of what people are doing with Tableau or with other platforms as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Well, if anybody does have anything else, feel free to email me. Like I said, for the file, or if any other questions come up. I don't know if I will have the answer, but I can at least try to find a resource and send it to you if I don't know off the top of my head. So I see the chat is popping up. Awesome.
Brandon, I was
Everybody
asking.
wrote what they did.
Yeah, I was asking
Martin.
who came. I was asking who came to the workshop.
Oh, okay, awesome.
From where? Yeah, because that's interesting to me. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate all of you tuning in. I know that
Me too.
everybody's busy and trying to, just deal with life at this point. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. That was awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you, guys. Great. Well, I'll stick around a couple minutes. Other than that, thank you all for listening.